Welcome to the Core Women Podcast, the place for women entrepreneurs, authors, and self-starters looking to build community and gain valuable insights through expert interviews with women at the top of their game. Join your host, podcaster, producer, expert coach, entrepreneur, and author, Dr. Summer Watson, as she aims to inspire and empower you through these candid conversations. Lean in and embrace the journey. It's time to start the show. Here's your host, Dr. Summer Watson.
Today on the show, I would like to welcome Amanda Johnson, who is a speaker, facilitator, storyteller, strategist, guide, and ally through the Story Oracle and Save by Story. She partners with emerging leaders of all ages and titles to become uncompromising agents of change in their families, communities, and industries. After 20 years of facilitating transformative experiences through story, literacy, writing, and narrative medicine, Amanda is determined to empower a generation that challenges disempowering narratives with curiosity and love, heals the stories that hold us back, and co-authors a magically ever after. Wow. We have so much to talk about, Amanda. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
Well, I am excited to have you here and to get right into this. But before we take a deep dive into your professional background, if you could describe your journey in one word to this point, what would that word be and why?
I would say miraculous.
Ooh, tell us more.
Well, because I thought it was just an inspiration to write a book and change the world, but it ended up being a journey of realizing that it was like a rescue mission for my own heart and mind. It truly is. When I look back and I look at the people that were brought across my path, the timing that they arrived, you could not write a more miraculous story, even during the hard times.
Wow. Well, this is a great segue into my next question, which is when you think back on some of the key points or milestones in your life, what are a few things that helped get you through and bring you to where you are today in your journey?
You know, my first two books have the word upside down in them. I used the butterfly metaphor very early because I had an experience with my son. Did you ever see those little, what do they call them? The butterfly bungalows?
I don't know. I'm
They're like
not sure.
little netted tent things, and you order butterfly larvae and you get to watch this entire process take place. And so when he was very little, like maybe 2, 3 years old, I found one of these. It was almost as tall as he was. He could go inside of it after they had opened up and were starting to fly around. But we watched this whole process. And there was this one moment where, you know, with a 2-year-old, you get to watch every single moment of the process. And so I actually got to watch one of the caterpillars just flip upside down. And I had this little niggle in the back of my mind that said, "Why do you resist?" And I was like, what are you talking about? Why do you resist? This is part of nature. They have to go upside down and create safety for themselves to become who they're meant to be. And here you are getting all of these invitations to become more, but you are resisting looking at things from another perspective. This was maybe the most important awareness that I ever got. And it came at me through a few different directions. It came
Wow.
through books. It came at me through a child development specialist that I took my son to. And she was telling me very early, you know, there's this really cool thing that happens with kids where they take these big leaps and then they have these moments of regressing. And this is where we do the most damage to them because they string together a bunch of words and then they can't remember 2 words and put them together the next day. She said, what you need to know is that that's part of them trying to catch up to what has happened. They've like taken a quantum leap in their brain and their brain is firing all these wires, trying to get everything wired for the new, it's like a new platform, right? Now I get to be someone who can communicate. Amazing. But in the meantime, they look a little upside down. They get out of sorts. They get frustrated because they can't do the thing that was so easy for them to do the day before. And so all of these messages were coming at me around being willing to be uncomfortable and upside down and to figure out what that resistance was and to create enough safety for myself in order to really ask the big questions of, why don't I feel safe in this situation? Why isn't it safe for me to talk about my story? Why is it suddenly so hard for me to use my superpowers that were so simple to use yesterday? And so I would say that realization that upside down is part of the journey and it's an invitation to figure out how to create safety for ourselves and how to, I was just talking to a friend about this morning. For me, it really is the safety in the relationships. Like one of the most beautiful things I've witnessed over the last decade is a community coming together and figuring out, what does it mean to be safe? How do we make ourselves feel safe? Because safety is the most important thing when you're talking about story. I'm not going to share my story if I don't feel safe. What does that mean for someone who wants to write a book? Holy crap, how do you feel safe with endless amounts of people who could pick up that book and read your story, or share it from a stage in a room full of how many hundreds of people who could maybe judge that story? So looking at like that internal safety piece has been a giant part of what has gotten me here and what continues to push me forward.
When you think about those points of reflection and you think about what brought you here and what helped you create that safety, what is something that you might tell someone listening today about how to create that same safety, whether or not it's a program, a book, moving forward with their dream to create something for themselves, whether it's a business or whatever? What is one thing that you might tell somebody in relation to creating safety and courage within themselves and maybe not trying to find it from the outside world? How do you do that for yourself?
One of the things that I've learned, especially just watching how people move into the space of like their calling or their destiny or their purpose, we get so excited and we just kind of jump into it. And I think a lot of us do that without this conversation around safety. And so when I talk about safety, I'm talking about internal safety with self. So what feels safe for me and what doesn't feel safe, because that's different for everybody, depending on how much trauma they have revealed to themselves or others or haven't. It's really about finding our own edge and then just doing a small step out. Because what I've seen over the last almost 2 decades of watching this is people who take these giant leaps without creating the safety internally or even in their relationships. How many folks have I watched lose their marriages because they took these big leaps without the safe conversations around, what do you want to do and why do you want to do it and what are the limits, like financial limits? What does it mean to go all in, right? Like, what did they say, that to bet the farm?
Oh, yeah.
These are all the things that are like encouraged for people who are on a mission. And yet they push up against this sense of safety. And every time we do that, we have to be really, really cautious about how we take care of ourselves. Who are the people that we have in our space? I always talk about this in the sense of when I was pregnant and when I've watched women across time getting pregnant and going through that process of sharing with people, that like you don't tell everyone at first because you have to get comfortable, safe with this new idea that you're going to be a mom. Even if you've dreamt about it, even if you've seen yourself, like it's different when it's happening. And so you tell like your person, and then you get used to that. And then you tell a few people because it's a little bit longer and you're a little bit more comfortable. It's building trust a little bit at a time in yourself with other people, with this really precious thing that you realize you have to give to the world, whether that's a child or a message or a mission.
And that is so important to look at it from the place of safety. But I also think it's part of that recognition of where you don't feel safe. So it is many of those points of reflection, as you mentioned, you had your own, and you had to decide what you wanted to put out there. I know the muse talks to us in many different ways and at many different times of our life. We could get very excited about this and we can jump. And I always say it's great to think about what your end goal is. And that can come from a point of response versus reaction. And when you respond and give yourself some time to breathe, reflect, understand, plan, and then give the world what you want, it makes such a difference. It doesn't have to be perfect. It's just there's a process. And what is your process for your reflection and where you feel safe in sharing A, B, or C? And I love that analogy about the pregnancy and when you were going to tell people. So I love that you've told us a bit about those points of reflection as well as given us that great example. How does a person tell a story for differentiation, emotional connection, building trust and credibility, along with supporting one's own mindset and success by words and phrases we use? So how does somebody go about doing that? As somebody who is the story oracle, who helps people with co-creating those stories, how do they do things like this?
It surprised me in the beginning. I was an editor for a long time. So people would come with their big manuscripts and I would have to dig a little bit on like, what were you trying to do with this, right? And make sure that they made it true to intention and then cut away the parts that weren't and then reorganize it into a more powerful. But one of the things that always surprised me was that when I would ask them, why does this matter to you? Why would you sit in front of a desk by yourself for long hours doing something that you quite honestly don't feel like you know how to do? You don't know exactly what you're doing half the time in the creative process. Like, what compels you? And I would get blank looks.
Really?
Yeah. I think it was because what was happening was that why question put them back in touch with their story. And that was something that they never planned on telling. Like right now, story is very trendy, right? Like you turn any podcast and you're like, oh, it is all about the power of story and storytelling to sell, to attune, to do all these things. Like it's all the rage now. But 20 years ago, this was not part of the conversation. And so I would really sit with people and say like, yeah, but why does this matter to you? And they would say, oh, well, and then I would get the story. And the story was the thing that they didn't want to actually tell. They wanted to offer the message and offer the framework and here are the steps. And this is how you overcome anything, your stuff. But they didn't want to invite anyone into their own story and their own journey and their own process. So for my entire career, the first few months of people working with me is this development of this relationship that's like, I don't know if I hired the right person, because the first thing that she asked me to do was to go back and go to that moment that connects with the moment of the audience. So if your audience is just finding out that they are headed for a cancer journey and you wanted to tell them this is how to make it through this, get to the other side intact emotionally, I would be asking you to go back to that moment where you're sitting across from the doctor and he said, look, these are the facts. And you would say, Amanda, I don't want to do that. I don't want to go sit back in that office and think about how I felt and what I was thinking and what was happening inside my body at that point. But that is where the connection happens for the reader, because they are sitting in doctors' offices and they need to know and trust that you've been there. You're not just someone who says, I've been on the journey, but like they can feel that you have been right where they are. I think this is one of the reasons why people never finish their books or develop superficial speaking careers, is because they haven't gone back and really unpacked it. And the writing experience is like nothing else that I have seen as it relates to being able to process some of this material that just didn't get processed because we had a trauma happen and we had to like get through it. But when we get to the opportunity of writing and trying to share the medicine of our journey, we get to go back and bring that medicine to that version of us and help them finish unpacking all of that material.
I love that, Amanda. That is so important. And it really is a form of therapy in a sense.
Mhm.
It's important to get ready because when you write, there's got to be a passion, a purpose, an impact. And it is a journey. When you start with people, it is a journey. It is a journey for people to do a lot of self reflection and why writing that story or writing that book is so important. I wrote a book myself and it's called F Yeah, Get Real with Strong Language. And it really is a story about your own values. And I use the subject matter of strong language to pose against your own values. And people are like, oh, I don't like that. And I'm like, do you not like that because you really don't like strong language, or you were taught not to like it? And we're going to go through this process, and it gives a process of how you're thinking about the strong language because it has to do with your own values and beliefs. But it's getting really clear about what you believe and don't believe, and that can align with different things in regards to your values, not just strong language. So when you take a look at things like that in the way that you work with people, they are confronting a lot and why this is meaningful and to be put out into the world. And when you do that with something that is meaningful, it touches on those emotions.
When I started this, I really just thought I was going to help people organize their content. Like, I really thought I was just going to help them get their message right. And then a lady hit the floor in tears at the first retreat. And I was like, oh, shoot, this looks like the transformational rooms I've been in. And I realized that it was about more than a book or a message getting true. It was about the person getting back to who they were before the story happened, because that's the opportunity of going back and looking. But across the years, as I've been working with people, it's hard work and it's beautiful work when it's done in community. And one of the things that we started to do as a community was I started to pull in story itself as a way to work through the stuff. Meaning, since my son was very little, I would use story to have conversations with him about really important things, because when he was born, I was in the middle of quite the spiritual crisis. And so wasn't sure about like raising him in a particular religion or church but that's where I got my moral grounding and compass. So how was I going to, back to the pregnancy thing, right? Like, how am I going to do this in a good way and raise a healthy, happy, moral human? And I found very early that story was one of these opportunities, because I had also been in my undergrad, had the opportunity to really wrestle with texts and stories and ask questions about, why did they write this? What was the context that they were writing this? Why'd they care so much? So we would have these conversations while we were watching shows together or reading books together. And so I've started to pull some of that into our process, because what I found is that most of us are blindly consuming stories. We're sitting in front of Netflix for, like, come on, these 10-part episodics. I think I went through one over the weekend, right? Because like a really long movie. It's so good.
Yeah.
But the question for me is always like, why am I addicted to this right now? I would rather stay up for a few more hours by myself watching this. It's because there's medicine in story. There's something happening between us and the characters, just like what happens with us and the characters on the page while we're writing, that gives us the ability to see more than we can see. But we have to be looking. We can't just sit there and we can just sit there and be riveted and enjoy it. But what if we also started getting a little bit more mindful with ourselves and our spouses or partners and our kids, and started asking questions like, why do you think I'm addicted to this show? Oh, yeah. Man, there's one to crack something open in a household. I've done that before. Like, babe, I have to confess something. I have been rewatching these 2 episodes from season 3, like by myself when you're not awake. And he's like, what? The worst episode. Like, those are horrifying episodes. I'm like, I know. And I need help because it's been like a week. And I think I'm trying to get something, but I don't know what it is. Can you help me? Inside of 20 minutes, I shouldn't have done this before. I was getting on a podcast and I looked like I had been bawling my eyes out, because I was. because it was this moment of me being able to say, there's this thing happening. And what about these? Like, what do you see? What are the themes in these 2 episodes that you can connect to what you know is happening in my world? And he was like, well, is it this? No, that's not. Is it this? No. Is it about? He's like, you're the most on purpose person that I know. But the only other thing I can think of is this like loss of meaning and purpose. And this minute that he said it, I started bawling.
Oh, wow.
It was the furthest thing from my mind. But here I was in the middle of the night watching and rewatching horrible episodes, people dying, people, like it was awful. And that's what it was, is like there was this part of me that was feeling lost and I couldn't articulate it until I said, so can you help me? And I felt so seen, so connected. He was completely undone in our kitchen. He was like, literally, this is the thing. Like, I had no idea. How can I help you? Like there was this deep, deep connection that happened because I said, I'm addicted to this story. So story gives us this opportunity to like wrestle with themes, but I think more important than that, like parts of ourselves that need attention and haven't been given a voice or an opportunity or a platform or a good setting. They need to be in the Wild West of Yellowstone and just be like, man, Beth Dutton, why does that she scares the crap out of me? But
I love her.
my
I love
son,
her.
I was like, buddy, who's your favorite character? And he looked at me and he was like, I don't think I can say, like, I don't know what that means about me, that Beth is my favorite. I'm like, me too. But the thing was that it was because we were in a space where we were wrestling with professionally required more Beth energy.
Yeah.
It required more Beth. And both of us were like so attracted to it. Okay, I don't want to be that broken and that scared. Okay.
Me either. But we need a Beth. We need part of Beth in our lives.
Yeah, right?
We definitely do. Oh, yeah. I mean, she's witty. She's strong. She's in your face. She's grounded. Whatever way it goes, she is who she is, and she's standing and rooted in who she is. I love that about her.
No one wonders. No one wonders about her.
Yeah, nobody wonders. She is who she is, and she'll tell the world, and she'll stand in that, and she's rooted in that. And so I love what you're saying here, because I absolutely believe that when you do this work, whether it is in story, whether it is in counseling, whether it is in coaching, and you work with people, you naturally need to expect that there is going to be some unraveling, because people love to share when they feel safe.
Yep.
Going back to what you said initially, is developing that safe place, that safe purpose for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
How are you, as a story writer, storyteller, counselor, coach, how do you consume that? How do you digest that? How do you help support that? I know counselors have been trained, but a lot of us who do this coaching or storytelling, you may not have that same training. So how are you going to create a safe place for the people that you're working with? It's a huge responsibility.
It is. It's the most important thing. And I even had, like I said, a session before I got on here today with someone who is so near and dear to me, who we had to get down to the bottom of, like, why have you been holding on to this stuff by yourself? What is it that's creating this lack of safety? Is there something in the culture? Is there something in the relationship that has happened? Like, we have to unpack this stuff, because I can't tolerate having someone in the space experiencing the pain of isolation in a dark story. Like, I can't do it as a leader. When you said that, like, well, I said I wasn't going to help people with their stories. I was going to help people with their books. And then the stories started unraveling. And fortunately, I had been trained in rooms with transformational facilitators, masters at the job. And so I kind of knew what to do, but I didn't have a lot of safety even in myself. So a lot of what was happening was the same thing that happened when my son was little. And I wanted him to have every bit of agency over his mind and his heart that I felt like I never had. And I wanted him to feel safe enough to share anything with me, all of the hard emotions and all the good stuff, because that wasn't a thing for me. And by the time I was in my early 20s, I was almost physically crippled, actually. By the time I was about 27, I went to a doctor and I was like, I think it's my hormones. And he was like, no, it's your rage. And I was like, what? I'm a doctor of internal medicine. And he's like, no, this is emotional and it'll cripple you by the time you're 30. And so when I had this baby, I was like, how can I make sure that you do not end up like this? I need to figure out what it means to create enough safety. And so part of it is just being in the process with someone because it's a different conversation, right? For every person. This person walks in after 20 years of being a clinician. They have a very different sense of safety in themselves and in a room than someone who's just starting the journey of self-reflection. So it's about trying to figure out like, where's the edge of the safety and how do we meet them there? And then what do we do when they compromise ours? Clinicians get trained. And I have a few therapist friends who were like, this isn't even like really done very, very, very well at school, helping people to unpack their own material so that they can help other people unpack their material and to realize like this is what they've signed up for, constantly working on their own material that's going to get tripped up by their client's material.
So how do you deal with that as a coach, as a storyteller, as somebody who's asking these really important questions that are going to have folks doing some reflection that are they ready? In your case, I'm wondering, do you preface this with, hey, I'm going to be asking you some sensitive questions, some questions that are going to ask you to dig a little deeper. Yeah. We're going to touch on some things that might trigger you. Are you ready? Are you ready to work with me?
I actually do a lot of digging, even in my initial calls with them to see if we're a fit.
Awesome.
I've told people that I've heard say things like, well, I have this financial situation or this relationship thing. And sometimes I can see how it's their moment to lean in. Like you just kind of know that someone's ready. You can hear, or you can hear that they have the right therapists in place or allies in place, they're resourced people who can dive in. But I've had a lot of people, I'm basically on my own. I've started this journey. I'm discouraged. This is the money situation. And I'll say, this isn't the right time because the creative process is a healing opportunity and there has to be enough safety to start with because we can help build around that. But this is just one area of your life, and we have like super robust programs where you're with us good chunks of time, quarterly in person, and you're with us on a weekly basis, daily, and on a monthly basis for 3 days working. And you have that cohesion and safety happening. But if this is your only place for that, no, it's not the right time. So oftentimes I'm trying to help people build safety in their space before they enter the program.
Oh, fantastic. I love hearing that. Thank you for all of the work that you're doing. It is so important. Let's talk a little bit more about the Story Oracle and Save by Story. Can you dig into that?
Sure. So I started actually with True to Intention, which was my first business. And that was the one that I thought I was just helping people with books. And then I realized, oh, this is about transformation and healing. Okay. But then people started to get their books completed. Their manuscripts were getting done and they wanted to know what to do with them. How do I publish? And so, I was in the industry and I was learning some things, but really one of my clients, she finished first and she figured it out. She used some of my team members and pulled some of her own. And so I asked her to come back and be part of building a program that would help people learn how to self-publish. And so we help people self-publish for a long time. And then eventually this new phenomenon happened of hybrid publishing. You didn't have to have this giant following to go to a traditional house. You could hire hybrid, which is hiring experts and then paying them for their services and then getting more distribution like what you would get through traditional means. And so I started to see people, I would help them build proposals for these big houses if they had the platform for it. But I would also help people through the process of hybrid publishing. And my son, actually, he was about 18 or 19 when he just kind of threw his hands up at me one day. He was so frustrated because I was getting pulled into these meetings where my clients who'd been in the safe place, writing, healing, like it was all about them and their journey and their story. And then they go into this industry that just like chewed them up and spit them out. Didn't even really care about their ideas for the cover, didn't really pay attention to their branding that they had for 15 years and built a multi-million-dollar business on. No, you're not going to look at the site and figure out how to bring those colors in. Like you're going to break trust with this person's entire following. Like what is wrong? So I was so frustrated with the industry. And my son finally said, you know what, Mom? I think it's time that we just built a publishing house. And I said, do you? Because I'm kind of busy over here helping some folks. And he said, I'll figure it out. And he did. All of those years of walking millions of miles in other people's shoes through story, right? Watching leaders take action, follow their destiny, have hard conversations. He used all of that. And we have 8 business partners who said yes. Half of them are financially invested in making Saved by Story a place where people can work from inspiration to impact. They can come with just the idea or a full manuscript and say, like, what's the next step? Because what I know after a decade and a half of watching people go through this is that no one really wants to have to become an expert at publishing, right? Like, we really just want people who know what they're doing to help us get it done. But there's also this element of it has to be done in a particular way. If you've poured blood, sweat, and tears, if you've told your story and been vulnerable, the product needs to look like that. It needs to look like you care about it. It needs to look like everyone who worked on that product cared about it as much as you do. And that's what we're about creating, is a place where the people and the process are just as important as the products that we're putting out into the world. Because we know that their stories are changing lives. Their new paradigms are going to change the world. And we want them to be whole and complete and on the journey of being healthy messengers. Because 2 decades of watching this industry and watching people get there and then disappear and get there and then have a health crisis or get there and then get a divorce. Like, I want to believe that we can create a space where messengers are not having to sacrifice their sanity and their safety and their soul to make a difference. I want them to have as much as they're giving to everybody else. And so Save by Story is where we're trying to make that the platform for them to do it. And then the Story Oracle is I co-wrote a book with about 20 of my authors, 20 of my clients in 2020. We did it through the pandemic. It's called You Can't Make This Story Up. And they tell their story of working on their message with me in this space. And I tell my story of why they came into my life at the time that they did. So things that, like, therapists and coaches don't usually do, kind of taboo. Like, you're not supposed to talk about how this person's stuff is impacting you. You're there for them, right? And that's what I was doing for many, many years, is doing my own work back here. And then there was this moment where I realized, I wonder if I just kind of opened up just a little bit and help people to see that the magic is going both ways. They're like, oh my God, Amanda came into my life at the perfect time. Well, let me tell you why you came into my life at the perfect time. And so we co-shared our stories of how this magic had happened. And the ultimate magic happened last year. I had a client come to me in end of 2022, came to me with an outline that was almost 800 pages long.
An outline of 800 pages? That's a Dickens book.
It gets better. It gets better. This is the first installment of 6 volumes. Okay. Like, this project is a saga.
Wow.
No story work, no character development. Literally, like, these are the facts. 700 pages. And I'm bawling my eyes out. And I'm thinking, this is for me. This is the wound, because the character was dealing with the same wound that I have been chipping away at for 20 years. I've been, getting at it, creating more safety, creating better, like, workarounds through the trauma, through the responses. But, like, it still hurt. And I wanted it to stop hurting. But how was I going to do that? This author comes in with the story and I'm bawling my eyes out. And I'm like, oh my God, I wonder, I have to work on this with this person. They were about to write this. He wrote 1,500 pages in 6 months. Madness.
Wow.
This first of 6 turned into 3 books. 3
Wow.
the first book. And there were a few moments in the process where he's second language. So there was a lot of trying to rework some of the phrasing and things that happen when people have English as a second language. So I was a little bit more of a writing partner. The story was solid, 700 pages worth of outline. Like it was all solid. But what I was doing was like trying to help him juice it up level the storytelling and make it a little bit more connective with the reader. As I'm working on this, I have 2 scenes that I engage and they healed that wound.
Wow.
I was in the story. I was the character. I was all of the characters. I was writing all of the backstories and all of the responses in the moment. And I realized that it wasn't just this story. I was witnessing what happened to me at 7 years old. It broke something. It broke the one story that I had and said something else is possible. Maybe this was the best the person can do. You know that cliche, they were doing the best that they could.
Mm-hmm.
And we say that and we believe it, but it doesn't take away the pain of what the best they could actually created as impact in our lives. The best that they could, I had this moment where I was like, oh my God, maybe this actually was the best that they could do. It was like everything broke and I went to bed for like 3 days because it was just a complete recalibration. Everything changes. That one story at 7 years old affected the way I built my business, the way I raised my son, the way I have created a marriage. Everything had to get reoriented around this new story, and it didn't happen in just 3 days. I'm still at the tail end of it. Both of my businesses stopped at the same time.
Wow.
It happened. And I know that it was because it was like they can't exist in their current form because I built them from that place.
Right.
And so they also have to be reshaped in this new paradigm. That's what the Story Oracle is about. It's about realizing that story is the answer.
Yeah.
Whatever question we're asking, story is the answer. How do I create more connection with my kids, my spouse, my coworkers, my team members? Use story. You don't have to share a vulnerable story. Ask what story they're addicted to. Create some quick attunement and connection around that. And if you need help sorting out, like, why am I feeling the way that I am? How do I move forward? Maybe that story that you're addicted to, that you're not telling your spouse you're watching in the middle of the night, maybe it has some medicine in there for you. And maybe there are ways to unpack it and create enough safety so that you can say, wow, I do have some darkness like Beth Dutton in here that I need to like figure out. I really need to figure out how to bring that energy without all that darkness. How do I do that?
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. There's so much richness here. So we've covered so much ground, but as we come to the close of the interview, my last question is, if you were to give the listeners one tip about how to write an impactful story, what would it be? And I know you've given a lot of tips already, but what would that one tip be?
Write it for yourself first. Know that more often than not, we are compelled to write and to change the world and to contribute and to put a message out there because it's something that we need first. I've had so many clients over the years where they spent all this money getting this book done. And at the end, it was really just about witnessing this part of their story that allowed them to heal and change their entire lives. And then they let go of that dream because the dream is just what got them to that moment. And so I say, write it first and don't edit. Tell the absolute truth, like no one else is ever going to read it, because that's where the real opportunity for healing and a new chapter begins.
Thank you, Amanda, for joining me on the Core Women podcast today.
Thank you.
You can follow Amanda Johnson on Facebook and Instagram at The Story Oracle 114. Again, that's at The Story Oracle 114, and on LinkedIn at Amanda Johnson 4, and at her website at the-story-oracle.com.
Thank you for joining us on the Core Women podcast with Dr. Summer Watson. We're so glad you're here and would love to connect more with you. Find us on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube at Core Women, and on Twitter at Core Women 1. For more about Core Women and Dr. Watson, visit corewomen.com. Want more support and resources for amazing women like you? Great! Join Dr. Watson and Jen Fontanilla at the Life, Love, and Money Collective, a Core Women production that aids in understanding the key traits that might be getting in the way of living a life that you are absolutely passionate about. Connect with Summer and Jen and find out more at thelifeloveandmoney.com.